I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Did you know there's a science to catching bad guys and bad girls? It's called criminology, and it's a social science. It's based on facts, trends, patterns, and statistics. Scientific models in criminology often take the form of profiles. So what do profiles say about Lucy? Do they fit or don't they?
That's a yes or no question.
Well, actually, no, it's not. Now, according to an article in The Guardian, in many ways, Letby fits the profile of the typical female serial killer. By the way, that is what those letters FSK stand for. I'm not sure why they don't just use the term female serial killer. Anyway, that my team and I compiled for the Journal of Forensic Psychiatry and Psychology in 2015. By analyzing cases in the US, we found that nearly 40% of female serial killers are nurses, nurses' aides, or other healthcare workers. That is pretty incredible and terrifying. That stat right there. Nearly half of all female serial killers are either nurses or healthcare workers of some kind. And that's according to research conducted by the psychologist Marissa Harrison. Before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you're finding this analysis useful, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, incidentally, among men, the top vocations for male serial killers are gas station attendants, hotel porters, general laborers, truck drivers, forestry workers, cops, soldiers, or pastors. So it seems like there's a far broader profile that's attached to someone's job than in terms of female serial killers. Now, according to Marissa Harrison, their analysis showed that female serial killers are likely to be white, probably Christian, average looking or attractive, and in her 20s or 30s when the crimes start. Well, if you think about it, that seems to check all the boxes. Lucy's family are churchgoers, as was Lucy herself, certainly while she was growing up. I definitely think this narrative around Lucy's Christianity is one that you don't really see very often. It probably is quite a divisive subject. According to the Daily Mail, Lucy is described as straight-laced. She attended the evangelical Hope City Church and had a close circle of churchy friends. This is according to the article. 5 girls who self-styled themselves the mismatches while studying for their A-levels at Hereford Sixth Form College. Apparently their social media pages are full of pictures of the clique larking around in the sunshine outside Hereford Cathedral, and then also enjoying a final holiday to Greece together. Now let's return to Marissa Harrison's profile. She has an elevated probability of being a healthcare worker, often in charge of caring for those who are helpless. Check. Those familiar to her are at risk, especially vulnerable people such as infants and the sick. She may murder for money or power. Now, what's interesting here is that one has a sense that Lucy's killing neither for money or power, and yet it's also possible that her motives do actually include both. Is she committing the crime so that her role becomes even more indispensable? Because we kind of get this sense from the story that she's the hero, the savior within all of these crises, and that there's a bit of arrogance about her, that she seems to feel that she knows better than those around her. Another thing that I think is interesting is, did Lucy end up getting paid more during the course of her reign of terror? Power does certainly seem to be part of the fabric, doesn't it? Then, going back to the profile, she may be arrogant or at times withdrawn and may have experienced a recent relationship issue. Well, check and check. We've heard reports from journalists observing Lucy in court that she has a cocky side to her, and we've heard the term withdrawn several times too. If you combine them both, there's a sense of Lucy as a passive-aggressive individual. Now, according to one source, it was claimed that Lucy murdered a tiny 10-week premature baby because she was angry that one of her friends she was texting didn't understand why she was upset at being given a break from working in intensive care following the death of another baby. It's the criminologist David Wilson's view that she sees herself as deserving of attention and skills that are superior to other people. She sees herself as a savior with unique skills no other person can possess. In other words, arrogance. One hospital source said that she was not that well liked. She had an air of arrogance and could be a bit of a madam. Also that Lucy was prepared to call out anyone else who made a mistake, whether they were a nursery nurse or even a consultant. In Marissa Harrison's article from The Psychologist, she acknowledges that in fairness, Lucy did not check some of the boxes in their profile, that most female serial killers have been married, and yet Lucy never was. And yet, if you think about it, the status of someone who is married and who was in Lucy's orbit is nevertheless relevant to this narrative. In other words, this idea of marriage is certainly part of the fabric. Does that make sense? Then she goes on to say, most FSKs, I must say, I think it's quite a stupid term to call them FSKs. Just say female serial killers. Anyway, most female serial killers do not keep souvenirs of their crimes, but Lucy kept bags of patient records and a diary with victim initials and their death dates. Now, if you remember what I said in yesterday's episode, I described her as very anal, very kind of detail-orientated in kind of a painfully precise way. And that might be another symptom of that, keeping these bags of patient records. Who does that? According to Harrison, in our analysis, we found a documented history of mental illness in about 40% of FSK cases. In other words, 4 out of 10 female serial killer cases. She goes on to say, I've seen no reports yet that Lucy has such a history. Well, I've got to say that 40% is less than half of female serial killers. So I'm not sure if it makes sense to say Lucy doesn't fit the profile. It seems more likely that if 60% don't have mental illness, then you wouldn't expect her to have it. In my experience, it's a popular misconception that serial killers have mental illness. I hear it all the time, that serial killers are nothing like who we are. Criminals are nothing like we are. Well, then if they are nothing like we are, why did people not notice them early on? The more troubling alternative, obviously, is that serial killers are a lot more rational than we'd like them to be, including sweet, innocent Lucy. And I think if there's anything to learn from this case, it's that serial killers can be in plain sight, living amongst us. And then the question does arise, well, why don't we notice them? And this analysis does actually address and I think answer that question in quite a intelligent and sensible way. According to the psychologist, many FSKs, many female serial killers had parental issues according to their profile. It is my understanding that Lucy's parents were supportive to the point of attending her trial every day. In other words, she's saying it didn't seem like they had any parental issues or that Lucy had any parental issues. I think that is a very weak glossing over of an incredibly important theme in this particular area. Wouldn't you agree that there are parental issues in this narrative? And I think it's a skewed view if you say parenting can only be negative or damaging if there's neglect involved. Because I think you can also have parenting that can be damaging if it's over-parenting. Parents who are too controlling, who inveigle their ways. Just parents who are overly not interfering, but overly involved in their children's lives, where there's too much control, too much coddling, that it actually renders children helpless and young adults, unable to make their own decisions, and that they don't really know who they are at the end of the day because of this excessive involvement. And that ends up creating a helpless and fearful person when they actually have to enter the real world, and the parent can no longer hold the hand of their child. According to the article, the profile is just a starting point for whom and what to look for when serial murder is suspected. The caveat is that a forensic profile is an imperfect predictor of future crimes, and that the description provided in terms of this profile applies to many nurses that you know. So in other words, it's a guideline, and you've got to then have critical thinking to notice some of the idiosyncrasies, right? So an area where my channel seems, as far as I'm concerned, far ahead of others in true crime is in the area of statistics. I did study statistics at university. Stats are an important part of profiling and criminology, but you don't really hear a lot of people talking about it. Statistics also offer a basic starting point. And so if you were artificial intelligence and your job was to filter suspects and to try and figure out, what was going on from through looking at patterns of information with cold indifference, one of the ways you would intelligently decipher these patterns is through statistical analysis. And you don't really see much of that going on in true crime. There are statistics regarding children killed inside the home that most people, the public, simply don't seem to know. They either don't seem to be aware of it, or if they are, they don't appreciate the importance of it. And it's thanks to this ignorance that cases like John Benet Ramsey and Madeleine McCann end up going unsolved, because the public are either uninformed or misinformed. So statistics are important. Now, it's using these statistics that the psychologists and other criminologists create composite female serial killer profiles, right? And it's based on frequencies and trends in previous cases, in other cases that they hope would serve as a starting point to trying to figure out, for example, a case like this. It's a statistical tool for investigating suspected female perpetrated serial homicide offenses in this case. And that then raises the question, well, if you've got these profiles, why does it still take so long to recognize a crime and a criminal, such as Lucy's crimes in this case? And this brings us to a really fascinating point in terms of this case. And so the writer, Marissa Harrison, says she's bewildered that administrators at the Countess of Chester Hospital failed to recognize Lucy's crimes after doctors raised concerns. And it is crazy that it took so long. Some outlets, according to the writer, have put the hospital's reaction down to a culture of arrogance. As a research psychologist, Marissa writes, however, I can offer a different perspective. She says, we all have a scheme, a cognitive framework of how people, places, and things typically operate to help us process the world around us. And then she describes having a schema for a nurse, and that a killer doesn't fit into our nurse schema. More broadly, she describes a gender schema, which she says, people tend to think about a woman as a nurturing figure, and that I guess that a man is more typically a killer than a woman. And so she says, so if you have the schema of a female nurse, well, a murderer simply just doesn't fit into that. Well, I think what we've found, certainly with this profile, is that female serial killers tend to be healthcare workers and nurses, and that's something one needs to have front and center in your calculus when thinking about this in future. Does that make sense? In conclusion, and this is me speaking, I think there are a lot of schemers with schemas in true crime that are simply not based on reality. The bad guys, think about it. Tell me if I'm on track, or tell me if what I'm saying is not true. Often on true crime channels, the bad guys are always portrayed as worse than they are and the victims more innocent than they are. It's because of this twisted way of thinking that ordinary killers slip through the nets of critical thinking. Why? Because we taught everything is black and white, good and evil, hot or cold. And so do you see, it's because Lucy was quiet and beige that no one saw her coming. It's because true crime insists that everything is shockingly obvious. Obvious, yes, but subtly obvious. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.